This is a meeting of the Special Committee of the Transition to 14 wards. We do not have quorum as of yet, and so we are going to just have a discussion or a presentation and then a little bit of discussion until hopefully somebody signs on and gives us quorum, but there's nothing that we particularly have to vote on today. It's more to make sure that we're continuing to keep the ball rolling on the discussion of everything that we need to get done in the transition to 14 wards. So for today, what we are discussing is the rules of the Board of Aldermen. So I'm going to share my screen here. Hopefully. Okay, can everybody see my screen? Okay, good.
It just says loading. It doesn't say anything other than loading, but
Oh, it doesn't, you don't see the 2022, 2023 rules.
No, we did for a minute, but now it says loading.
all I see is loading.
Okay,
Madam
weird.
Chair,
Yes.
I think Alderman Rice is correct. We do have to call roll. Even if
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Okay. Then Madam Clerk, let's call the roll.
Alderwoman Davis. Alderman Vaccaro.
Present.
Alderwoman Ingracia. Alderwoman Boyd. Alderman Bosley. Alderwoman Middlebrook. Alderwoman Rice.
Present.
Alderman Todd.
Present.
Alderman Page.
Present.
Alderman Stevens. Alderwoman Schweitzer.
present,
Alderman Grass. Alderwoman Walker. Chair Green.
Present.
Alderwoman Davis. Alderwoman Ingracia. Alderwoman Boyd. Alderman Bosley. Alderwoman Middlebrook. Alderman Stevens. Alderman Grass. Alderwoman Walker. We have 6 present.
Okay, we have 6 present, still not quorum, but we'll proceed with just a presentation and discussion if I can get this working now. What is it? Why is this doing this? Okay, let's try this again. I'm trying to get this to.
It's showing
Okay.
title right now.
Okay. Trying to get it into share screen or bigger mode, but that's all right. All right. So what we want to do today is just go through an overview of the rules, and I've gotten a few suggestions for changes from members of the board and also from our clerk. And so we wanted to go through some of these changes or proposed changes, and also open it up if there are additional changes or modifications that any members of the committee think that we should look at before to give as advisement, I guess, to the next board. It'll ultimately be up to that next board to adopt their own rules, but I think it behooves us to give some recommendations to that new board of what these rules can look like and changes that need to take place as we do that transition to 14 wards. So first, rules are titles and selection and powers of duties. And the recommendation for this was something that Alderman Cohn has brought up several times. as something that he would like to see. But it would be to elect the leadership roles of vice president, floor leader, and assistant floor leader from among the Board of Aldermen. So currently, this is done based upon seniority. The ask from Alderman Cone was that we look at electing these roles in the next board. Any questions about that? All right. Then,
Sorry, Madam President. On that note, so the election, so right now the sort of adoption of the rules happens formally at the first meeting, but amendments can be made at a caucus meeting ahead of time. So what would be the mechanism for electing those leadership roles? Would that happen during that first meeting or ahead of time, or what do you think?
I think during that first meeting, and we are looking into since technically we don't have caucuses, since we're non-partisan. I think that there's actually greater sunshine requirements than what we have adhered to in the past in terms of the business that happens at those caucuses. So it may be that all of this business ends up being conducted in that first meeting. And so any changes that are made are done during that first meeting of the board.
Okay, I really like that from a transparency perspective. So thanks.
All right, nothing for rules 3 and 4, which is the annual session, special sessions, unless anybody else has something that they would like to see as a change to those rules. No proposed changes for rules 5 through 12. But then the clerk has a proposed change for the regular order of business, which I will allow him to speak to.
Yeah, presently the order of business that's listed in the rules starts off with the roll call, which makes it strange to try to be sure to put in the minutes that the meeting was called to order, because the order of business does not call for a call to order as the beginning of the meeting. That's the only thing you're showing there right now. We did have another recommendation as relates to the agenda.
Yeah, I think
that-
I think that makes sense. If anybody else has comments on that. The other just recommendation, because in the order of business, this also includes the prayer. One thing that it's kind of been thought about is maybe rotating the responsibility to invite a speaker for opening prayer. So maybe we go through either based upon seniority or based upon order of ward number, alternating, who is able to invite somebody in each week, maybe a, clergy from their prospective wards or something like that, so that we're making sure that we're inclusive of, religious and faith leaders across the entire city as being folks that can open up our board.
I have a question on that as well. Do you want us to just jump in if we have questions? Is that easiest?
We just do this as a discussion.
Sure. So on that, is there any way to, I think that's a great idea to rotate sort of responsibilities for opening prayer. Does it need to be religious leaders? Does it need, is there some way that we can outline, that this can include sort of just a moment of pause or a moment of reflection that isn't necessarily religious tied? That's one of this is definitely an area that I've gotten kind of surprised from colleagues and constituents that this is something that is still in our rules, and respecting that religion is important to some folks and is not important to others. And so trying to figure out what the right role and how best we communicate that to the public, I think would be good going forward.
I agree. I think that there's opportunity to rename it, so it's not just the prayer, but a moment of reflection, a moment of I think you said a moment of pause, but I think that there's a way for us to make clear that it doesn't necessarily have to be a religious prayer or a religious leader, that you know, reflection and faith can take a lot of different, look like a lot of different things. And so we want to be inclusive of that.
So I would say, I know I've heard the term invocation used. It's kind of like a secular kind of starting off thing. And I you know, and I really, I like the idea of rotating and getting, you know, more variety on this a lot. I too think that, you know, it's weird, and it's weird that like our standard one has to be, you know, if we don't have something like that's, you know, it should be more secular. The other, I would say that like when we rotate responsibilities, and I don't think we need to make this a rule, like, you know, if someone like, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, or if someone's busy that day or what, but like I appreciate the like guest speaker part of it, you know, like, so it definitely doesn't have to be religious. It could be someone totally secular or whatever, but like I think it's kind of neat that we bring in somebody, you know, not just one of us stand up and say like, oh well, let's do a moment of silence for so and so, but like we have somebody in our community kind of come out and like start the meeting off, you know, do an invocation. That'd be my suggestion.
That could also be an opportunity for somebody to present poetry or.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
100%. That's exactly what. But like, you know, an alder person would kind of have the responsibility of inviting someone for that day to do it.
Okay, so we can finesse some language around what that looks like to make it a little bit more secular and inclusive of, ensure that it's inclusive of both, you know, folks who are religious and folks who are not.
And by all means, yeah, I mean, and that's up to the alder. Like, you know, if someone wants to bring the Pope in, like that's up to them. But you know, it's up to everybody can kind of do their own thing.
Okay, Alderman Page, I see your hand is raised.
Yes, I just had a quick question. I too like the idea of adding more diversity. I like the invocation idea, but one of the things when you move it off of an expected prayer or religious observation, are we going to put some rules in place as to what this can be? You see what I'm saying? I think there need to be some guardrails around not necessarily who is invited, but what is presented. You see where I'm going?
Yes. Yeah. So it's not just anybody can come and say their, you know, 3-minute.
A 3-minute political position or something. I think if we're gonna, I like the idea of adding diversity and inclusion, but I think that makes it incumbent upon us to put some guardrails around what can be presented.
Maybe something, because I agree, like, you know, you don't want it to be used as like an extra way to come in and talk about something on the agenda and advocate for something. So like maybe, you know, you can basically say that like bring a speech in and it can't, you know, address any matters that are on that day's agenda or currently before the board or something like that.
Yeah, I wonder if there's, so speaking like to the moment of reflection, to kind of have a statement of intention of what the moment is supposed to be, that this is, you know, a moment for us to pause, to come together, to reflect on, you know, the common good, the work of the body, the good of our city, you know, community, that type of thing. If we, so write up sort of a statement of intent and ask that folks are adhering to that statement of intent with probably maybe a timeline also is helpful. But yeah, I think that's a great point, Alderman Page, that having some guardrails around that is probably important. It is, I mean, it can be such a meaningful space for us to come together and take that pause and take that sort of reorientation. Like we're frantic coming into the board, there's lots of stuff moving around, and so to take that moment of pause and come together is a great idea. And so that intentionality, I think, so some sort of statement reflecting that's the goal here is reflection and community and bringing us together as a moment of pause and sort of intention setting as we go as we go into our meeting. And yeah, definitely not used for political posturing or, you know, campaigning or things like that. But we have, I mean, we have had advocates come in on different topics that have been meaningful. And so it's sort of separating out the special guest versus opening invocation versus someone being honored with a resolution, right? I think that would be the space for someone to be able to speak, you know, a little bit more about, you know, something that's really important. I'm thinking about like that when we have Moms Demand come in, or when we've had trans pastors come in, and to be able to honor them with a resolution so they can speak more to something that is more political, but the invocation is maybe not the space for that.
Agreed.
All right, any further discussion on the prayer? Then we can work on some language around that. Let's see, all right. Standing committees, so Alderman Stevens has been working on those new definitions and unfortunately could not be here today. And so I don't yet have an update on the standing committees, but
Madam Chair,
yes.
there were two other recommendations staff had for the agenda.
Okay.
One was
Go ahead.
related to the report of engrossment.
Okay.
It's presently combined with third reading. And as you know, engrossment comes before third reading.
Right.
So our suggestion is to separate it from item 16, which shows third reading and report of engrossment, and make engrossment its own agenda item. So
Okay.
report of engrossment right after perfection. Then after that, you have third reading. That's another place where we have to kind of doctor the minutes to make sense.
Okay.
The other part was on as you remember, the order of business used to have enrollment.
Yes.
And there was a lot of kind of confusion around what enrollment was. There was some confusion around engrossment, but there still seems to be a need for a report of the finally passed bills that would typically happen in the enrollment section. So
Okay.
we are suggesting having an item in the agenda for the report of the finally passed bills. And that's where the clerk will just list all the ones that have been finally passed in that meeting that are prepared to be signed by the president.
Okay.
That's another area where we kind of doctor the minutes to
Okay.
make sense. Mhm.
I think that makes sense. Okay, we can figure out the verbiage that needs to be in the rules to reflect that. Special committees.
Ken.
I think, Mr. Clerk, you had some suggestions
staff
around
had it.
special committees.
We had a whole lot of thoughts. We didn't put them all, we didn't send them all to you.
Okay,
But,
well, let us know all of your thoughts. We can synthesize them. This is the opportunity.
Staff gets dangerous when you give us a chance to think.
That's why we want to hear what you propose.
Well, it wasn't, our proposal is about clarifying the motion that would take place in the engrossment committee.
Okay.
If it, the way it presently reads, the engrossment committee can empower the chair or the vice chair to do the engrossment and not the committee. But they would have to specifically do that. Otherwise, the committee is responsible for meeting and taking a vote.
Right.
But the rules does not and do not outline what that vote should be, what that motion should be. So they end up making motions as if it is a regular board bill. We moved that board bill so-and-so be considered engrossed with a do pass recommendation. Our recommendation as staff, to just make it clear, is that the motion would be that this bill is considered engrossed.
Okay.
So then you never have to get into a problem of a bill being reported out of engrossment with a do not pass recommendation.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. All right. Special committees. Did you have
Oh,
on that as well?
yeah, the rules do speak to how a special committee is formulated.
Yeah.
It does not speak to what purpose a special committee has. The board has subcommittees and then it has special committees. Even though the rules do not specifically outline subcommittees, chairs can do that. And so our recommendation is just to have some language that clearly defines what a special committee does and what they can do, and what a subcommittee is and what it can do, and who are the memberships of each. It's pretty clear that a subcommittee is
Yeah.
a committee of that committee,
Right.
but can special committees have people outside of the
Right.
board as a part of it? I think it's better to clarify it than, we think it's better to clarify it than not.
I think that's great, Mr. Clerk, and also adding that those meetings need to be called to order and yet public the same way that other committee meetings, or that the full committee meetings are.
Mhm.
Do we think that there is a difference but in like the makeup and the rules and what we want to see in a like board-wide special committee versus a subcommittee special committee? I mean, can it, you know, can we just say like, you know, special committees and then, you know, either they're created by the president of the board or the chair of a subcommittee? Or are those, were they, I mean, like, do we want people like from outside the board being able to serve on both, or one or the other?
I think that historically, as a matter of practice, subcommittees have been comprised just of committee members.
Correct.
But special committees on occasion have taken in people who are not members of the board, but are more of advisors. And, but I think that it would probably be good to clearly define that a subcommittee is made up of members of a specific committee of the board. And that they're charged with,
Right.
you know, doing a certain task or investigating a certain issue or focusing on a certain issue that is under the purview of that larger committee, but needs additional attention. Whereas a special committee, I think we need to delineate that it can include people who are not members of the board, but I think we need to be clear on whether if they are not a member of the board, how are they appointed onto this special committee?
Right.
And once appointed, do they have the same voting privileges as members of the board? And I
Yeah.
would be open to input or discussion around that.
I mean, I think that, you know, having the mechanism to have like advisors on a committee would be helpful. And I think that being able to do that on a subcommittee would be helpful too. I mean, I think sometimes you're doing more nitty-gritty work. But I don't know if they should be able to vote. So, you know, yeah, some way to delineate that people can serve, you know, but then, you know, are they members or do they just show up every week as guests, you know?
Or is it possible to do, and I'll ask Mr. Clerk this, is it possible to designate somebody like an ex officio where they're a member of the committee, but they're technically not a voting member?
Right.
Yeah, from what I can tell and how the rules are reading it, you can do that. It doesn't say you can't.
Would it be something that we could say, you know, when a special committee is created, that they or a subcommittee is created, or I mean, either one of them, subcommittee or special committee, that they outline this, you know, this rule in the creation, that they outline, you know, whether or not there's going to be outside members of the public. And if I would say, I mean, it depends on what the committee is meeting for, what the purpose is, because if they're voting on something that's going to come back to the full board, then I think that we may run into some issues with empowering people who are unelected to vote on things
Right.
that come in front of the boards, right? So, but there could be, if it's a subcommittee reporting back to the larger committee that is empowered, then I don't think that there would be a problem with having folks have that vote input, you know what I mean? But there's a kind of a fine line there, and I think it would depend on the intent of the committee and what they're trying to do there. But I mean, making a rule that requires when a committee or a special committee or a subcommittee is created, that these guidelines be put in place upon creation.
Right. And that too is the staff's recommendation. The rules do cover special committees, but subcommittees, it does not at all. So our recommendation would be is that there's language placed in there that talks about and gives guidelines on how they are established, who can be members, what is the duration, what are the subject matter that they are dealing with. And then perhaps we're also recommending some language that points out that a subcommittee's powers does not supersede that of the committee of which they're a subcommittee of.
Yeah.
So people can be clear that you cannot start using subcommittees to circumvent the work of a standing committee who is that their area of work.
That makes sense. Do you know, Mr. Clerk, do you know if the House rules speak to subcommittees at all on that? If we could borrow language?
From my understanding, they do, and what I looked at a small section on it as well, and they do some pretty clear guidelines on it.
Okay, that could be helpful, Madam President, to pull language from there.
This has become a problem at times for the staff when members begin to ask, well, can the committee do that? Well, the rules are kind of silent on it, and we cannot, the staff cannot interpret that for you as a official statement.
Okay. I think that makes sense. Okay, any more discussion on the special committees, subcommittees? We will look at the House rules. We'll work on putting together some guidelines around that, and who can vote and not vote, and the purview of those committees.
I may I just make one other point here. That is that we do have a slight concern that if there end up being lots of special committees and subcommittees, you just have to make sure that some language is in there about the staffing of them.
Okay.
Because there is a limited amount of staff.
All right. All right, well, it doesn't want to go to the next slide. All right, hold on, let's try it over here. Which slide am I on? No. Okay. Try it if I do it that way. All right, I don't think that there were proposed changes for selections of chairs, vice chairs, committee members, unless folks have ideas or suggestions around these areas for us to consider.
I think it's really going to be down to what the standing committees look like and how many standing committees are functioning. And with only 14 older people, folks are going to be spread, people are going to be meeting a lot on these committees. And so, I think preference, the preference system is to, what committees do you want to serve on and that type of thing. I would just say the more transparent the adding of, the appointment of committee members is, the better. But I know that's something that you tried to do here in the fall, was be transparent about that and try to get people where they want to be. So if people are going to be serving on 4 or 5 committees that meet every day, I would hope that they want to be on those committees. So
right. All right. Calling meetings. All right, I know that the clerk had some recommendations around the calling of meetings too.
Posting. adding to. Oh, okay. I get it. The staff's recommendation was that this is what happened. This has been the problem. On occasion, the chair will get up in a meeting and announce that a meeting is going to be held on a certain day and has not checked with staff at all. That day or time may not be available. And on its face, it doesn't look like much, but what we have found is that people of the public will say, well, they announced it on this day, why is it on this day? And so staff has to end up explaining, without making it seem crazy, that they couldn't have it that day because there's 2 other meetings already scheduled back to back. So our recommendation is that no chair stands up or announces a meeting without first having, checked with the clerk or the staff that's designated to do the scheduling. So we don't have that kind of problem in the future. And that the meetings are scheduled in such a manner that the members of the committee can attend.
Yeah. So I think the recommendations to address that from my office is, could we ask committee chairs to set, with their committee members to set regularly scheduled meeting times.
Mm-hmm.
And so we always know,
Mm-hmm.
I think the goal is to try to get us down to 7 committees. And so if each of those 7 committees has a set meeting time,
Right.
even if they end up having to cancel because they don't have any business that week, we know that every Tuesday at 1 o'clock, public safety meets. We know that every Wednesday at 9 a.m. HUDs meets. And so we just create that regularly occurring schedule. And that's not to say that if there's an emergent situation that an additional meeting could not be called, but the default is to set regular meeting schedules.
Were you thinking about putting some language like that in the rules?
Yes.
Okay.
So something along the lines of, within, I don't know, within a week or 2 weeks or, 14 days of a committee being assigned, that, that committee shall, submit to the clerk their regularly scheduled meeting date and time for the entirety of the session.
Just I would still suggest you have some language about it be set in consultation with the clerk or the designated staff, because you still end up with the same thing.
Yes. Okay.
Just seconding all of that, that would be incredible to have a regularly set meeting schedule, and for the other members of the public to know that this is when this business is being discussed, and for members of departments that need to be brought in for, if streets is always meeting, I know Chairwoman Tyus was holding streets meetings every Wednesday at 9 or 10 a.m. I think. So folks know that if they're going to be called in, they're going to be called in at the same time every week, and that can be built into the schedule. I think all of that is great. And even if it's, Madam President, setting out a, here are the times that are available for committees to meet, and once, and maybe that's something in sort of a pre-meeting that happens, or a side meeting that happens with committee chairs, that, here's the available schedule, like we have the available desks on the floor, you pick this one, and you kind of set out the calendar that way. But yeah.
Your staff will be happy to recommend that kind of schedule with spacing in between the meetings.
Yeah. I think that will make everybody's life easier.
A lot.
Okay, we will get that written up. All right, formation. I'm trying to remember. Oh, recommendation, and maybe Clerk Kennedy can speak to this as well, is to provide greater definition on why a committee of the whole might be used. So in my tenure, we have never called a committee of the whole. And so I don't know if in your tenure, it has this has ever been used, but it might make sense to provide some definition around
Definitely.
when this might be used. I mean, one of the things that I kind of thought of was, if we're going to go through this public engagement process over the RAM settlement money, maybe it makes sense to have a committee of the whole for that, so that all board members are engaged in that public, information process. But
I have seen it done several times.
yeah, if you could maybe educate us on how you have seen that done in the past.
I have never seen it done without a lot of discussion. And it was primarily done to bring a board bill out of a committee that had not been heard within that 30 days, and there'd been no action upon it. So then, but there's still no definition from my remembrance in the rules that says what are the conditions in which you can bring it out, other than if it's just been in the committee for 30 days.
Okay.
And so I think further delineation, without being just myopic, the more definitions and the more clarity you can put in the rules, I think the less arguments you can have around them.
Right. Okay. So how is that different from a motion to discharge?
Well, from the floor?
Yeah. So, I mean, we've
The
like,
motion to,
yeah, with the minimum wage bill, we did a motion to discharge from committee and we brought it straight to.
oh, I hear your question.
And
Well,
so what would be the difference between doing that versus a committee of the whole?
Committee of the, you would have to discharge it from a committee first.
Okay.
Take it out of that committee, and then you could either assign it to another committee or do a committee of the whole.
Okay.
It's a two-step process.
Okay.
And I've seen it done both ways, where a board bill was taken out of a committee and then assigned to a different committee. And then I've seen it where it was taken out and then a committee of the whole was called to deal with it.
All right. We'll work on getting some better clarity.
Right.
on
Madam
that.
Clerk, could we, the end of the last slide, I think, was talking about public hearing procedures.
Oh, did I skip something? Yes, sorry, I did. I skipped.
That's okay. I didn't know if you had comments to start, but had thoughts as well when you're finished. Yeah.
The thing that we were thinking there, and I, talked with Mr. Clerk about this previously, is, now that Zoom has the ability to have people log in and raise their hand, that I don't think we need to be asking the public to have to sign up in advance. They should be able to sign in, and then it probably needs to be delineated in the rules that the chair of the committee needs to ask for people who would like to speak on the bill or provide public testimony. They raise their hand, whether in person or through Zoom, and then are recognized to speak.
May I?
Go right ahead.
There's only one problem, and that's excellent because, we first started out, Zoom didn't have that feature. The rules require that a list be created in half an hour before the meeting and presented to the chair of speakers. So there would have to be some doctoring of that part of the rule to make what you say do work.
Okay. Not that.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my questions too. So, especially if the new board is moving to hybrid potential meetings, what does that look like for folks who are writing their name? When we would meeting in person, folks would write their name and their address and information on the sign-in sheet, and they could do that as the meeting progressed. So we didn't always uphold that half an hour rule there, but so I guess you kind of need to have rules that encapsulate both in-person and virtual attendance. And how do you collect that information from folks who are attending virtually? Are they required to put that in the chat, and the clerk who is attending, staffing the meeting is collecting that information, or someone is collecting that information? But yeah, I think that's great. I think it's great that folks will be able to sign up on the day of. I'm sure that will take some burden off the staff ahead of time to say, here's the public link, please join us there. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, the way it happens now is that or we were doing it, was that you would make your request that you want to speak, and a confirmation email was sent back with you on the procedures on how to operate in the meeting. Now that
Sure.
part helped tremendously. I would still say that we would have, even if it's in person, that those procedures written down so people know how to participate in the meeting. And it would be good for the chair to announce it too, to say something about how they participate in the meeting, so that people realize that there are some guidelines and then some expectations
Yeah.
on how to function in the meeting.
Yeah, that's great.
Mhm.
Yeah.
What the staff would do to kind of adhere to the half an hour is that we would hand it to the staff would hand the list to the chair around that half an hour time and see if they want to continue taking names. So technically it was given to them, but they determined to continue to take names past that.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so I think we can get that. All right. Did that. Transgression of the rules, points of order. So my, so my recommendation for points of order is just to provide a little bit more clarity in stating that when a point of order is called, instead of it just being point of order, that the alderperson would need to state the rule to which their point of order pertains, and not just a point of order.
Right.
And I think that just helps to build clarity and also ensure that we're not just making up rules, that we're actually following rules. Amending motions. I think Mr. Clerk recommend that sponsors of amendments be identified when an amendment is presented in written form. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think we've all seen it where we've had multiple amendments floating around and we're not sure which amendment belongs to what alderperson. And so I think that is really common sense. Didn't think we had any there. So one of the things that we're going to work on doing too is just making sure that our rules are consistent with Prop R language, particularly around abstention, or when, as Prop R says, people have a private interest in a bill or a conflict. And so I think we have to make sure that our rules mimic or are aligned with what Prop R says around that. And our recommendation would also be that conflicts not only are filed with the clerk of the board, but we should also have a public information portal where those conflicts can be viewed by the public. Any thoughts on that?
I think that's a great idea to have that that information public. I think you're right that bringing in, really incorporating what it was that was passed in Proposition R would be helpful for the board, both for the board's operation and then for the public's expectation of what those guidelines were and are.
Yeah. So we just want to make sure our rules are, I mean, Prop R trumps our rules, but we need to make sure that the rules are in alignment. Let's see, co-sponsors. Mr. Clerk, I think you had more comments on co-sponsors.
The staff had some ideas on that too. You know, the rules are silent about co-sponsors. You know, it says you have to have a sponsor, the main sponsor. And so then the way it has historically been done is just the first person on a board bill is the sponsor or the main sponsor, and then all the others are co-sponsors. But if you don't know any difference, you won't know any difference. And the public doesn't know, well, the first person is the main sponsor. We're just suggesting that the bills clearly identify who is the main sponsor and who are co-sponsors. That's it.
And so another question or thought I have around that,
Mhm.
as we encountered that this session, what happens if a sponsor of a bill that is no longer on the board?
Mhm.
Does the first co-sponsor then become the new sponsor? How do we determine how that bill can be moved forward?
Just following what the Congress does, they consider once a bill has been introduced and the sponsor is not there, it is the ownership or the property of that body. And so then they can, through vote, take the person's name off and or put someone else's name on. Now, what we have also done is that if there's a co-sponsor, there could be a vote to take the main sponsor's name off and just leave the co-sponsor as the main sponsor. But none of that is delineated in the rules.
Right.
That's just following how Congress operates it. So it'd be good to have some clarity and delineation in the rules.
Okay.
So as in the past, so this past session, we didn't take anyone's name off unless the board took a vote
Right.
to remove them.
Okay.
Then there's another unclear, but it is somewhat stated. The rules say that, of course, the sponsor is responsible for their bill. That's basically, it says it in a couple of places. That's not the exact language. So sponsors have determined a number of things. If they will accept a co-sponsor, and then two, the order that they want the co-sponsors to be shown sometimes.
Okay.
Though that is not specifically said in the rules, that has been the procedure because it does mention that the sponsor, controls what happens with that bill.
Right.
It might be good to have some clarity on that also in the rules.
All right. I think I got that written down. Alderman Page.
Yes, just a quick question. In my tenure at the board, I don't think I've ever seen an instance where a co-sponsor was challenged or opposed. Is there any history? Is there any precedent for that?
If I may, I can
Yeah.
speak on that.
Go
There
right.
has been. Oftentimes when someone would stand up on the floor and say, I want my name on there, the sponsor will speak to a staff member or the clerk and say, well, I don't want their name there. And so you never heard a public conversation about it. It was just never put on there because the sponsor said don't.
Okay, all right. I just had never seen that. I was just curious where that might be used.
That's how it's been done over the past sessions. I've seen it in the past where sponsors just stood up and said, I don't want so-and-so's name on my bill.
Wow.
That's not a way to
Wow.
lottery.
It's not nice, but just give me the history of what I've seen.
Okay. All right, thank you for that history. I just had never seen it in my 2 years. I was curious where that might be used. Thank you.
I would have thought when somebody says they want something in banked, it puts everybody on it. So, and I've seen people say no.
Right.
Well, an embankment, if I'm right on this, is only the folks who are present as well, right? So it's not all of the members, it's just anybody who's there in the room. And somebody could always go back later and say, take my name off of that if they didn't
Right.
object. Yeah.
But I'm just saying why, just.
Yeah.
You could become a co-sponsor without even, but anyway, I'm just saying.
One of our main recommendations is that co-sponsors be clearly identified as co-sponsors.
Yeah.
I would agree. I think it's a good idea.
Yes. Okay, I think that makes a lot of sense. All right, let's keep going here. Okay, introduction requirements. I don't have any notes here. I just have it highlighted, so that means somebody had a change on it.
The staff had a recommendation for
Okay,
the introduction for resolutions.
okay,
If we can speak to that.
yes, go right.
Presently, board bills are due on Tuesday by 12 noon. Resolutions are due on Wednesday by 2 p.m. The agenda has to go out on Wednesday by 5 p.m. What's been happening sometimes is someone may not get a resolution until 1:59 p.m. on a Wednesday that has to be constructed. And so all of that, and you get 4 or 5, sometimes 15 of those, and they want them introduced that Friday, then it holds off the completion of the agenda until well after 5 p.m. And that's happened on occasion. I mean, staff is working well after 5 p.m. to get the agenda out. Our recommendation is that resolutions be due on Tuesday at 12 noon like board bills.
Okay,
So everybody's clear. They are both due on the same day at the same time.
okay, so also have noon on Tuesdays.
On Tuesday, that would be the recommendation.
Okay. And then this is something that we had discussed previously, that we also added as just a recommendation here, is having a legal review before bills are introduced. So having something go through a legal review, I would say either by our, board attorney or the city councilor's office, and that legal review is submitted with that board bill for when something is introduced, because what keeps happening is we get something to perfection and then we get a letter from the city councilor's office or somebody that says there's all these problems with the bill, it's already been perfected, we have to bring it back. And so it would be better to know what legal issues might exist on the front end.
Right.
And then the other recommendation is, with the passage of Board Bill 64, there are specific requirements for what needs to be attached to tax abatement and TIF bills. And so we might want to add that into the rules as well, just to clarify that in order for a bill to be in its form for introduction, that certain types of bills have to have the attachments that the Board Bill 64 said, in order to be considered in perfect form.
I have a question to ask it.
Sure, go right ahead.
In that legal review, because we did discuss that, and that's one of the things we felt staff should do. Were you thinking that would be done before it is introduced?
I mean, I think that's up for discussion, but I think so. I mean, it definitely needs to be done before it's perfected. But what are folks' thoughts? Is that, should the process of that be you submit your legal review when you file your board bill, or is it you have until perfection to?
I guess my question is, who would be doing the legal review? How much time do they have to complete it? Because you don't want them to get held up and you're waiting a long time to get it introduced, and what the staff, how that works through the staffing process. I think perfection makes sense in terms of having time for all of those things, especially because sometimes legal opinions differ. But also I understand the need for the committee to have that discussion and to have presentations that reflect the bill as well. But the full board does get to discuss the perfection. So I guess I'm mixed between before passing out of committee and, before perfection as what I would see, especially because, there could be lots of different opinions on a bill.
I think this is a really tricky area to figure out who is the right, form for that. If we don't have a couple of people probably assigned to legal review, then that it's, you know, we're not just putting things on one attorney for the whole board. Because then there's someone that alderpersons and their staff can be working with as they're creating the bill to make sure that it is legal. But you're right that you also don't want something held up because a difference of a legal opinion, because lawyers like to disagree. That is what we do. We argue about interpretation. So I would hate to hold somebody up, but I would love a process that incorporates the guidance of an attorney, the guidance of legal counsel in creation. And so I think that's probably something you're going to have to wrestle with staff, the staff supports, and then a procedure as well that is different from how things currently work. And hopefully coming from only 14 alderpersons versus 28, that, you know, that may be more bills per person, but it might be easier to kind of direct those conversations. But I'd be interested in hearing, you know, from our own legal counsel on that, like, you know, maybe that's a conversation to have with him and from some other cities as well, as to how those procedures work and what's the best way to set them up for success.
If I may,
Go right ahead.
we as staff, we implemented a process, and it didn't happen every time because of the speed that things are happening. But once a bill has been filed, we send a copy. You know, the rules require that the clerk sends copies to the president so they can make the assignments to committees, but we would also send copies to the legal counsel for their review. And on occasion, the legal counsel has caught things and it's called the sponsor to ask questions, or at least to raise these issues to them about it. We were trying to implement something that would give that review. But when things start going quick, and there's a lot of bills, it just doesn't, it can't happen because it's difficult for the same person who's writing other people's bills to give yours a good review.
Right.
And there is some, if I may, there's some politics to the city councilor's office. Sometimes a member does not want them to know exactly what they're bringing in because of some of the politics of it. You know, there have been issues down through the years where members, not as much recently as when I first got there, where they were feeling like the city councilor's office was under the auspices of the person who appoints them to their position, and they were not giving their bill a clear review and that kind of business. So however it's arranged, you need to just kind of keep that in mind, that there is some politic to the city councilor's office.
Yeah, I know. So I believe at the state level, bills do have to go through legal review of some sort before they are filed. Does anyone know what that process looks like? If not, we can figure it out.
I believe that members have to submit their bills to the staff before it's even introduced. So, but it is very much a nonpartisan, a separate office that covers that with really strict rules around who gets hired in those positions.
There were a few cities that we looked at when I first became clerk that they couldn't even fathom the process the city of St. Louis had in terms of introduction of board bills, because all of theirs are not introduced until they have had that review. I believe there was Indianapolis. I'm just going off of memory because I don't have the notes in front of me. And I think also Chicago that we spoke to.
Was their staffing in that case very, very different?
They did. They had an extensive legal staff as a part of their body, a part of their system.
Okay. Jay just came in my office and said St. Louis County also requires the legal review before introduction.
Right.
So I think we'll meet with Lou, kind of talk about some of those staffing needs. We'll look at what the county's doing in some of those cities that Clerk Kennedy mentioned and see what procedures we can create, because I agree. I mean, I think that it probably should be in like our in-house attorney through or legal office through the Board of Aldermen that is providing that review, since sometimes the city councilor's office is on the opposite side of the board. I think we just have to figure out what that process looks like and the time that's needed to conduct a legal review.
Can I ask a sort of tangential question here on introduction? We don't, it's, unless I'm missing the rule, we don't have anything in about bill numbering. And I'm wondering, there've been a few cases over the last couple of sessions where a board bill number has not been used. Could we require a statement of why, like of what happened there? Because it's pretty unusual. Like I don't remember it happening at the beginning of my term. And so just wondering if there's a process for saying, here's an explanation of why that happened, or if we just prevent that from happening in the first place.
If I may speak to that a little bit. From my remembrance, the rules do mention that the bills have to be numbered sequentially,
Okay.
both for board bills and resolutions. Beyond that, so then that's why you'll see if someone introduces a board bill and say, no, I changed my mind, I'm gonna withdraw it before it has been listed on the agenda, then what staff will do is say, this number is not going to be used this session, because though it had been filed, it had not been officially introduced to the board on that Friday, but the person has pulled it. And since the numbers have to be done sequentially, you try to account for what happened to that number.
Right.
And it's accounted for by saying it will not be used that session. That has happened more frequently recently than it has been done in the past. And that's why you have seen that more frequently over this past year, certainly. Something in the rules about it could give more clarity. I even think perhaps, because we did have this discussion in staff about clarifying when and how a board bill or resolution can be officially withdrawn.
Yeah.
Because that's not in the rules either.
Yeah, I think that would be good to look at, whether that be House rules or something about what that, just so that there's clarity around it, so that there isn't any question of, once we've filed it, does it then become a public document that, if someone were to sunshine and say, hey, board bill number 35 is a number not used this session. I want access to that document. What was that? Is it public at that point? Is it not? So yeah, I think some rules around that, outlining that process would be helpful.
All right. Well, it's doing the thing again where it doesn't want to.
Oh, I guess the last thing on rule are bills. Mr. Clerk, when I was doing my ordinance review, the ways that board bills were finalized, maybe 20 years ago or so, it was kind of the further back bills. There was a block of text that was attached, and it was probably because they were physically scanned and not, the way that we're doing it right now, where they're edited and then just converted to PDF. But something that states more than just the date of introduction, because right now, as if only the PDF of the bill is being submitted and uploaded to the website, as far as our ordinances go, there are a lot of cases where there's no documentation of when it was signed, when it was enacted, so we're missing something there. And I don't know if that's your office or if that's the registrar that needs to.
All of that information is on the website. So when you go to a board bill as a public and you click it, you can see the whole history of that bill. When it was introduced.
It is on the Board of Aldermen website, it is, but when it is converted to an ordinance, but once it's converted to an ordinance, it is not the same. So in the ordinance search on the city website is where we're having a fallout of information. So unless you're able to go back, take the board bill number off of the ordinance, so it's saved under an ordinance number on the registrar's website. Once you can still see the board bill number, and so you could go back and find the session and find the board bill in the legislative history as the Board of Aldermen uploads it, but it no longer has in just the text of the document, it was signed by the mayor on this date, it was enacted on this date, but it used to have sort of a stamp at the bottom that would include all of that information. And I wonder if that's something that we can include in our form of board bill, sort of as the last, so maybe on the bottom of the title page, even to include a block of text that says introduced on this date, if there was an amendment, that it was amended on this date, so that it's on that PDF and it's not solely contained to the website. Do you understand? Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, we thought about that. It's so you're basically if you go through the Board of Aldermen's website, all that information is there.
Right.
But if you
Right.
click on just ordinances, I see you can't see all that information.
Right, right,
Mhm. It was on the bottom of those pages before because they would type all that in.
right,
And
right.
that's why,
But we
'cause they
don't,
didn't have computers back then.
yeah, yeah. And since we're not, since we're not using typewriters in our office, at least in City
Okay.
Hall.
Hey, they didn't have computers when I first got there.
Right,
So-
right. Yeah, and so maybe the title page is the best place to do that, to, if that
Mhm.
title page is included, to have a box of text that we're able to update, and say, you know, here's the date that this came through, that it was amended in committee, that it passed in committee, that it was
Yeah.
signed by the mayor or not signed and then enacted.
Right.
That would just be helpful for clarity, I think.
Unless the IT is able to make available through that ordinance portal, if you would, all that history as well, make that available there as well.
Yeah,
could be.
I think that could be a good alternative. It makes research a little bit more difficult if you're downloading the document itself.
Mhm.
So the PDF versus the text that's on the website. So unless
Yeah.
we adopt some real, you know, legislative bill tracking software, then I think if we've got Adobe that's editable and we can edit those PDFs and insert that information, I think it might be cleanest to make sure that it follows the bill through. And then because there are also some quirks on things that I saw where, you know, dates were 00000000. And so it's just, you know, glitches in the system versus that PDF is not going to get altered once it's enacted.
Okay, we can think that through.
Sure.
I mean, I thought the whole idea of technology is supposed to make it easier.
Supposed to.
It just adds
Yeah.
additional work.
Yeah.
Because it would be nice if you're able to just, you know, key it in one time and it appears all these various places.
Right.
That would be nice.
Yeah, and maybe that's a conversation with the registrar to figure out what works best for their systems as well.
Right.
Okay, committee amendments and substitutes. So this is, you know, something I think we ran into a little bit is it's
Right.
kind of unclear in committee substitutes in particular. You know, does it need to be filed with the clerk? Does it just need to be sent out to the committee members? And so this is sort of our recommendation, that committee substitutes. So right now you have to make sure the committee has them within 24 hours. Our recommendation would be that we extend that by 12 hours and have committee substitutes need to be submitted to the clerk within 36 hours. And then within 24 hours, the clerk could then make sure that all of the committee members have that committee substitute. So that gives timing for all of those things to happen instead of it all having to happen at the same time.
I think the rules are also not clear on it. If you read that rule, you could interpret it to mean that only the sponsors committee sub has to be done 24 hours in advance. You could interpret it that way. So you might want to just make sure it's even more clarity on that part, that you're looking for, that all committee subs have to be done this way. But the rule does clearly say committee subs must meet the same format as the board bill.
Yes.
It's the original board bill. And so committee subs have come in that are completely different from what are the requirements for the formatting of a board bill.
Okay.
And we have not turned those around, but there's no need to continue to accept them that way.
Yeah.
They're supposed to meet the format as set forward by the clerk.
This flags for me also the definition of hours and business hours versus weekend hours. And we've operated a couple of different ways. You know, we didn't used to count weekends. Now we're counting weekends. And I think that's a question for staff is, you know, if we're asking you all to work on Saturday and Sunday, if a meeting is being held on a Monday for a 24-hour requirement, if we're talking 36 hours, then that is a Sunday work for a Tuesday meeting. So just being clear about
That's true.
you know, do the weekends count in that 24 hours? How are we operating there?
Mm-hmm.
So what is-
Clarity on that needs to be.
Yeah, that needs to be clarified, I think, throughout the
Yeah.
rules.
Mm-hmm.
Are there preferences on whether we're doing business hours versus real hours?
And I believe there may be a charter comment to that effect of dates, and maybe I'm thinking if a bill has been amended, then there's a 3-day requirement, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, so does that 3 days include weekends or does it not? And I think we've been treating it as if it includes those weekends.
Yeah.
I don't know if it specifies one way or the other, but it would be something to check in with
Mm-hmm.
with the charter on that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we will look at that. My recollection is that it doesn't specify. But let's
Yeah.
look that up.
From my remembrance, when it comes to noticing of meetings, the state statutes say you cannot count days the office is closed.
Okay,
So if it's closed on Saturday and Sunday, you cannot count those 2 days as part of the 24-hour notice.
all right.
Mm-hmm.
We'll figure that out. Engrossment.
I think that was to address what I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I think that is.
Mm-hmm.
I think we did that. We can skip that. Reading, I think those were all form. We already talked about changing the filing date for resolutions to the
Mhm.
CS board bill. Amendments.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing when we were looking through the rules that we also thought needed more clarification, because I think this is in the charter, but it's not necessarily in our rules,
Mm-hmm.
is that on the first day, when we introduce rules, it's majority to adopt those rules.
Right.
To amend it at a later date, it's 2/3.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we need to specify that within, because I think that comes from the charter, I don't think that's
It's,
written in our rules, unless it's in one of the
I think it
appendices.
is. From my remembrance, it is in the rules
Okay,
under there. Uh-huh.
then I think we're fine. I probably
If
did not
that's there.
see it. Hours and duties. So this was the other thing. The rules currently state like working hours of 9 to 5. I think we want to allow more flexibility within the rules. So if we have evening meetings, it would give flexibility to say, maybe staff doesn't come in until noon on that day because they know that they're going to be, doing a 6 o'clock meeting rather than working 9 to 5 and then staying extra for that time.
Mm-hmm.
And then the duties, we kind of talked about this before, just adding to the list of things of when board bills are in their proper form. We have to make sure the exhibits that are required under Board Bill 64 are a part of that final form. And then I think the question we had is just, whose responsibility is it at the end of the day to ensure a bill is in proper form? Is it the clerk? Is it the secretaries to get it in?
Yeah,
Legal assistants to get it in that proper form?
the rules say that no staff member is to accept a board bill that is not in the form that has been set forward by the clerk. Now, what happens is that, and the staff has turned board bills around when they're not in the proper form. What has happened though is as it goes along and other amendments are made and there could be a substitute, then it could end up not being in the proper form that is required when it is introduced. So if this is for future boards, it just has to be clear that this board, the bills have to meet this form, or they'll be sent back to the person who sent it.
I
Because
think
the
what we,
rules clearly say that the staff cannot accept a board bill that is not in the proper form.
right. So I think the question becomes then whose responsibility is it to get it in proper form? So is this
Oh, I
thing
hear you.
that
Mhm.
falls on our new legislative assistants that we're hiring? Is this something that falls on the secretaries? Whose responsibility is it to put all of, to make sure that all of these things are there before it's submitted to the clerk's office?
Mm. It would seem to me who's ever drafting it or the legal staff. I think that may need to be thought through a little bit more.
Okay,
That's
we'll
all.
put a
Yeah.
pin on that. Because I think in theory, like the LAs that are being hired should be able to do that work, but because it's not necessarily legal work, it's
Right.
a lot of formatting
Formatting.
and things like that.
Formatting.
So we may need to, as we update the job descriptions of folks, when those staff positions are officially added, that may need to be something that's in there. Okay. Let's see. Classification and hiring procedures. So the recommendation we had was, since the president's office, we're the ones who go and negotiate with the budget office, that we need to explicitly state that the president's office is in charge of budget and approving expenses, while the clerk's office remains responsible for managing payroll.
What is meant by approving expenses?
That is a good question.
Do you want, you want me to speak to that?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so
could I ask a question? I'm sorry.
Oh.
On here, the recommendation, the president's office in charge of budget and approving expenses. So is this is for the president of the board. And then what I'm reading, it says the clerk will manage the payroll for the president of the board. Is that what it's saying?
So currently payroll is managed by the clerk for the Board of Aldermen in its entirety, including the president's office. But the president's office is currently, like in practice, in charge of the budget. But we don't necessarily see approve all the expenses. Right now, that responsibility has been put on the clerk's plate. But the responsibilities have been split, and it makes it a little confusing for us to know what's in our budget when we are not the ones approving expenses. So that's the idea, is to provide some clarity between the roles, so that the president's office can do its job of advocating for the budget and knowing what's in the budget on behalf of the whole Board of Aldermen.
So I guess my confusion is, and the clerk might can clarify, I thought the clerk dealt with the Board of Aldermen and the president of the board dealt with the president of the board and their budget. I thought it was two different budgets.
No, we have one budget for the president and for the Board of Aldermen. So we met with the clerk and our legal team and put together all of the asks for this year's budget. And then my office has to go and meet with Paul Payne and advocate for all of that money or all of the things that we're asking for in that budget for the entire board.
So we've been doing it wrong.
No,
No,
not
I
wrong,
think
no.
there just hasn't been a lot of transparency.
Transparency. I would have used the word clarity.
I was gonna say
Right.
clarity. Yeah, because
Right, on how that is to work.
right, because we were always told the president of the board had one budget and they had one expense and we had another, and they were two different entities. And so now I'm hearing they're the same. So that's why I was like, it was confusing. Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Can
But
I
when you
ask, sorry, just on the slide that's in front of us, when you say the president's office is in charge of budget and approving expenses, so are you talking about expenses of the office of the president or office or the entirety of the Board of Aldermen?
It's all one budget. So
Well, right, but okay.
Office supplies for the entire board is one line item, regardless of whether it's the president's office or the board.
Okay.
So that's what makes these things tricky, is that it's all one budget. But technically the president's office is the we're the people that work with Paul Payne to get the things we want in the budget.
Would it be helpful then to divide, to ask if it's possible to divide those budget line items to say, here's the one that's for the Board of Aldermen and staff, elected Board of Aldermen and the staff, and then here's the ones for the president's office, because those are two kind of different functions. Is that something that you're thinking about asking for? Like, I guess I don't really have a problem with this. And I understand the challenges that you will have had, but delineating those two things and then still having one Board of Aldermen budget. It makes sense that the president of the board is advocating for the entirety of the Board of Aldermen as a department. You're the head of the department. That makes sense for that advocacy, but separating out that so that, the clerk is in charge of the work. I don't know. Maybe that doesn't make sense. You all have looked at this more in practice.
I think on our end, we just need to know what what expenditures are being made, so that we're not just working on getting money in the door, but we're also understanding how money is being spent going out the door.
I believe that the new accounting program is supposed to be able to give you access to that information more quickly than ever before. I know we once talked about splitting that, like the Alderwoman mentioned, having the president in charge of the budget of the president's office and the clerk of the rest of the board. You can have reporting about how those expenses have been going.
Okay. We can figure that out. We have not yet gotten training on that new software.
Jay's gotten the training.
Jay's gotten the training, but it is complicated.
It is.
Okay, can figure that out. And then the other recommendation, or what we heard from the clerk, was wanting the executive secretaries to not be under the clerk.
That's not quite, that's kind of a misinterpretation of the question that I raised.
Okay.
To Jay. So I wasn't necessarily advocating for that. I was just raising the question in relationship to all the changes.
Okay. So whether they should, or is there
well, basically the rules are saying that the clerk is responsible for the daily operations of the office.
Right.
And so then the question was raised about, I remember at one point there was a conversation about the executive secretaries having one for each 14 members, as opposed to 7. So that was more the question. If it's going to ultimately get there to one for every alderperson, would that alderperson want to select their own secretary, as they're talking about doing for the, I believe it's called their administrative assistant?
Legislative assistant.
Legislative assistant. So that was where the questioning was. If it got to that point, of one per alderperson, and it's my conversation with Jay, would you think that that the alderperson would want to select their own secretary? And then if so, what are the legal ramifications around it? That was what the discussion was.
Okay.
But
So,
it just kind of
yeah,
got misconstrued, that's all.
for the budget that we advocated for, it keeps 7 executive secretaries. And so there would be an executive secretary for every 2 alder people,
Right.
which is a much better ratio than we have right now. I think we just have to figure out, you know, who is managing where, how is professional development happening? What is, you know, all of those things. You know, we've gotten some things set up, getting executive secretaries trained on CityWorks, and once we get our CRM in place, they'll be needing to get trained on that as well. So I think it's just making sure that there is a chain of command there. All right.
Can I, sorry, I really, we're going long. But then I'm looking at Rule 87, and it specifically defines executive secretary to the Board of Aldermen. And, you know, shall be primarily assigned to serve as confidential secretary to the vice president. So I think we may need a rewrite on some of the titles and what those mean. And then the other piece that I have been curious about is there is a complaint procedure that is outlined, you know, with the personnel committee. I think it would be interesting as you know, as the board takes a new shape to look at, you know, what sorts of procedures are necessary to protect staff, you know, protect and, you know, allow for review and complaint if necessary. So that procedure, maybe we need to clean that up a little bit about what that process actually looks like. And then also for members of the board as well, what does decorum mean? What, you know, if there is a complaint that is not a political complaint, but a treatment amongst others, or, you know, what is protection for us as employees look like, as we're not civil service employees as well. We don't have those same types of protections. So it's not something that I had time to get into, but it might be worth looking at how other elected bodies manage that type of complaint. If you just so that we have the best working environment for everybody.
Right.
All right. I think that makes sense too. I wrote that down. All right. Postage. This is always the most controversial thing. So in our budget request, and we have not had our budget meeting yet, but in our budget request, we requested a mail budget for the Board of Aldermen that would allow each member of the board to send one ward-wide constituent mailer per year. That's sort of like a you know, a ward directory, the way that you know, our state reps and state senators send those on an annual basis. I don't know if that will be approved or not, but we have asked for that. And if so, our recommendation would be, if we're able to secure that budget, then to eliminate the postage allocation, because instead each alderperson will have a mail budget for their office.
So the budget would be enough for one ward-wide mailing? Is that what you're imagining? Or would the budget be for one ward-wide mailing, and then, you know, sometimes we have these one-off, you know, you need to send something to 150 people or, you know, 200 people, and then have an outside, but I mean, can you clarify that a little bit?
So I mean, at least be able to send to every household in the ward. And I mean, you can decide whether you want to actually mail to every resident in the ward or not, but it'd be setting up that a mail fund instead of kind of hoarding stamps the way that we do.
Right.
now.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a really good idea. And, thinking about it, for the smaller one-off mailings, there is a amount that each alder person will get that is for use for their office. So it makes sense to use that money if you have, say you have $100 of other mailing that you have to do throughout the course of the year. You can just spend that.
Can I love this idea. I love, being able to use electronic stamps, and if I know that things can be purchased more cheaply if we're not just buying books of stamps. But there is a question that maybe we should figure out, who has stamps left over at the end of this term. So I have a drawer that has a lot of stamps in it, and would love to figure out what the right way to give those back is, and make sure that, as we're all exiting the office on April 17th, that those are going to the right place.
It seems like a lot of people take them with them when they go.
Well, we shouldn't do that. They're not
Doesn't feel
personal
right to
property.
me.
That's city property. Yeah.
Any Schweitzer, where did yours go? When you got there were no stamps, right?
Oh, I was gonna say mine are in my.
No, but your
What?
predecessor, I believe, took the stamps with her, didn't she?
I did not have any stamps when I started. That is correct, but I
think
don't know
that's
what happened to
happened.
them.
I think that happens all the time.
Yeah, or I mean, they
Yeah.
could be given to another older person. I've given some to another older person when they've wanted to make a mailing or that type of thing, and so that's permissible. And so I don't want to cast aspersions and say that anybody's doing anything wrong, but we should probably have that discussion.
Well, but I've been saying all along, it's going to be a lot cheaper to be able to go to a mailing house and mail stuff than it is. So if you took even the exact same amount of what you're doing for stamps and basically did a mailing dollar amount, because there are some of the older people that still like to mail things, which seems, with Facebook and everything else, it doesn't seem like the case, but but anyway, I think, you just go with that same dollar amount, but let it go either way. So that if you want it in stamps or you want it in the ability to go to a mailing house, that might be a better way to do it too.
Can we do a postal meter inside the office that, everybody's got a code and you've got an account, and that way there's transparency, on who's using what.
But you would have to, like, if you go to a mailing house, they put the label and everything on it at one time.
Yeah.
And if you did it in the office, somebody would have to take and put everybody's address.
Sure. I mean, but we have mailing. I mean, the city does. We have a city mail room, and I imagine that we could work with them and the city employees to do that. But if they're, if we operated the same way as another department did and just had a postage account and kind of build that way, so it's cheaper. I'm sure that they get bulk rates that are cheaper than us.
Oh, I know. Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I guess you'd have to provide the mailing list of households to them. Yeah, you would have to generate a list.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Would be my guess. Anyway, I'm just chiming in because this has been one of my pet peeves since day one.
Yeah, so we are committed to figuring that out and getting the mechanisms in place so that we're not dealing in a stamp economy anymore. We just have to update the language around composition of wards now that we have 14. So that is throughout the entire document, and are working on doing that. And I think, okay, that's all I have highlighted here. But also if there are other things that committee members, I know we've talked about a lot of things and had quite a few come up throughout the discussion, but if there are other things that committee members think that we need to be looking at or revising or investigating, speak now or forever hold your peace.
I have another one.
Okay,
Item Q under the appendix is required voting majorities. You'll need to go through, because some of them are numbered as to 20 votes or 15 votes.
Right.
So you'll want to go through there and make sure that those definitions match with the new board.
All right.
Thanks for this work. I know it's a lot, and I appreciate the collaborative nature. of
Asking,
the-
why is it okay in our community? I said.
I think you're on
I'm
unmuted,
using it,
Alderman
asking.
Boyd. Alderman Boyd, you're
You know what?
unmuted.
I do believe you might have a quorum if you do need to do any kind of a minute thing.
Right. I also wanted to say that I appreciate the comments earlier about having this discussion in the first meeting as opposed to the traditional caucus that had been held before. That had been on something that I was hoping that would start coming up over the next few weeks. You know, I'm not sure if I'll be at the board or not, but I think having that as a public meeting is really important. So thank you for already thinking about that.
Are there other things?
Ma'am?
Clerk, yes,
Yeah,
go
a
right
couple things
ahead. If
that
I
hit me.
missed something, because we had a long list.
But on just a kind of caution on that first meeting, you know, that's also where you'll be swearing in all the members of the board, and that's really a lot of pomp and circumstance. You may not want to have a real heavy discussion in that meeting. You may not, because you have all your guests there. Just might want to consider that. The other thing the staff did once before, some time ago, is to send in some recommendations for a protocol when a sitting alderperson passes. What is the procedure? And I think there needs to be one, because I've been there, and Joanne Wayne was a member and she had a car accident and died, and several families. So the board, the members can be grief stricken at the time. So if there's something in the rules or somewhere written, what is the procedure? Do you put up this wreath in front of the door? Just what are the procedures will help, so you don't have to think about what to do while you may also be grieving as a body of members. That would be helpful. And then when it comes to the budgeting, the language around that, I would be sure that you mentioned that there should be some consultation with the clerk on it in the final, in putting the budget together. Staff did develop a recommendation, and I can send that to you. We submitted it to personnel, and they suggested we send it to rules.
Okay.
And we'll do that.
Go right ahead. Alderwoman Rice.
Yeah. So two quick other things. One is, so as far as adopting rules, is that supposed to be the first action of the new board once folks are sworn in? I'm wondering if either you call a special like a committee of the whole in that. So I guess you're gonna have to figure out, how that procedure is going to work. If the rules are supposed to be adopted at the beginning of the session and you want to have all of the new folks who are elected participate in that process in a public way, that's where it's going to get a little bit tricky. And I guess you could recess the first meeting, call a committee of the whole and then adjourn that later, or something. There may be a procedure for something like that, but it definitely makes sense as to why we used to do it in caucus.
I think that it would probably be done under miscellaneous and unfinished business. So I think we would probably be adopting the rules, and then anything that those rules that we adopt says that we need to do, like offices, staff, all of those things, I think would then probably be done under miscellaneous and unfinished business.
Sure. Okay. So, I mean, in that case, you are going to have if you're presenting an amended set of rules, folks are going to have to be ready to debate that at the very beginning of the meeting. That makes sense.
And we are working to have an inauguration swearing in ceremony that'll be at 8:30 a.m. before the first board meeting, with all the pomp and circumstance out in the rotunda, since this is the first board of 14 and all of that. And then we will go into the chambers for the 10 a.m. meeting, also recognizing that we still are not at a place where we're going to allow quite as many people in the chambers as we have had in past, we figured we would do that more public ceremony in the rotunda where there's a lot more space to do that for all the guests to be there.
Sure. Oh, that's a great idea. The other piece is you may want to consider a section of the rules on operating via Zoom, for operating virtually.
Right.
What does that look like for, if you're a hybrid meeting or if it's a fully virtual meeting, what is voting, even putting in the rules that, we're asking you to be on camera unless there's a special circumstance, right? So that we're, but all of those kind of bits of operating virtually that we never really formatted into a rule form, it might be helpful to do if this is the new reality is a hybrid or potentially virtual form, then memorializing those in the rules would be helpful, I'm sure.
Yes, and I think we also need to figure out, so with the new updates that are happening in the chambers, it does give the ability for hybrid meetings.
Yeah.
But I think we need to set some rules or parameters around when is it acceptable to Zoom into a meeting versus being physically present. And, I think, in case of, medical issue, definitely. I would say in case of bereavement, you have to go out of town or whatever because a loved one died. But are there other other cases, and do you have to, put it in writing to the clerk in the president's office that you need to be, you request to be able to attend virtually because of, X, Y, and Z reason, and, what are those acceptable reasons?
Staff also recommends something being, that was in our recommendations to you as well. There's something around virtual meetings in person, rules around it, and procedures.
You all have a big job ahead of you. So I'm grateful that we could have this discussion today. I think it's important for the public to see, just how important these rules are to our operating, and, the more public we can be with that conversation, I think it builds trust and things. And, for those of us who are on our way out, it's good to be able to give some input from our experiences. So thanks for the opportunity.
Anybody that wants to help with the nitty gritty actual rewriting of these things to incorporate all of these recommendations is always welcomed.
Was there any approval? Do we need to do approval of the minutes since we have a quorum? I believe there's.
We do have quorum now, so actually we did not approve minutes or do any of that since.
So should we make a motion to approve?
May I mention one other thing before that?
Yes.
And that is, you might want to mention in the rules about who and how the arbitration of the rules are done. If a conflict arises, who makes that decision or how?
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Sounds good. So with that, since we now have a quorum, I need to open up my minutes here from the last meeting.
That was the second.
February 2nd.
February 2nd. All right. I will entertain a motion on the approval of the minutes from February 2nd.
So moved.
Second.
Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderwoman Davis. Alderman Vaccaro.
Aye.
Alderwoman Ingracia. Alderwoman Boyd.
Aye.
Alderman Bosley. Alderwoman Middlebrook. Alderwoman Rice.
Aye.
Alderman Todd.
Aye.
Alderman Page.
Aye.
Alderman Stevens. Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Aye.
Alderman Grass. Alderwoman Walker.
Aye.
President Green.
Aye.
Alderwoman Davis. Alderwoman Ingracia. Alderman Bosley. Alderwoman Middlebrook. Alderman Stevens. Alderman Grass. We have 9 aye votes.
By your vote, you sustain the motion on approval of the minutes. Is there any further discussion? If there are other rule changes you think of later or things to consider, please send it our way. We'll work on getting a draft together of all the numerous recommendations that we have gotten. And we'll continue working on this until the new board.
My apologies, President Green, we have 8 aye votes.
8 aye votes. Thank you. If there's no further discussion, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Do we need to excuse anyone, or did you take care of that?
Nobody asked me to be excused.
We can excuse them, it's fine.
okay.
We're not racist.
It's all right. Who has not been here today? I will entertain.
Alderwoman Davis,
Davis and Gracia, Bosley, Middlebrook, Stevens.
correct.
I will entertain a motion to adjourn the aforementioned older people.
Yep.
Move that we
Excuse.
excuse them.
Or excuse, what did I say, adjourn?
Oh, move we excuse them, that's fine.
Second, previous roll.
Hearing no objections, motion to excuse is passed. I'll now entertain a motion to adjourn.
I will make
So
that
moved.
motion.
It's been moved by the alderman for the 18th. Was there a second?
I'll
Second.
second it or whatever.
Okay.
doesn't matter.
Seconded by the alderman from the 23rd. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned.